Alright, so today we are going over the review. You guys have a test tomorrow, so this is the evolution review. A lot of you guys were here yesterday. A lot of you weren't here yesterday. So if you don't have this done, you need to fill in the answers because you're going to need to know all of this for the test, okay? Alright, so number one here, the ability to survive and reproduce. That is fitness. Okay, so letter C. So for one, you should have written C. All right. So Darwin talks about those individuals that are the fittest end up surviving. We talk about how fittest doesn't mean the strongest. Okay, because sometimes being strong or being fast doesn't help you. You got to be able to camouflage. You got to be able to survive diseases. So being the fittest is really important. And basically it's the ability to survive and reproduce. How do you end up surviving? Well, you basically end up being able to live in an environment for a long period of time. And then the key also here is reproduce. So we want to be passing on those genes to the next generation. Natural selection and evolution can't happen if there isn't any reproduction. Okay? All right, awesome. Number two. A trait caused by the genes of an organism. It cannot change over the organism's lifetime. This is also known as instinct, okay, something you're born with. This would be letter B, adaptation. So we talk about adaptations. Sometimes we use this word incorrectly because we say, oh, they're adapting. But what we really mean is that they're acclimating. So adaptation is a genetic thing. It's a trait that somebody's born with. They don't have to learn it over time. They don't have to develop it over time. It can't be changed really because it's in the genes. And an organism doesn't change its genes or its DNA over time. Okay, so for example, knowing that you need to hibernate in the winter or knowing to fly south when it gets cold out. Those would be examples of adaptations. All right, number three, an adjustment an organism makes to better deal with its environment. It occurs in the organism's lifetime. This is acclimation, so letter A. Okay, so this is something that an organism learns in its lifetime, or it's just something that happens that changes the organism in its lifetime, but it doesn't actually change the DNA or the genes of the organism. So there was a really silly example about a wolf that got its hair burned off in a fire. Okay, getting your hair burned off doesn't change your DNA, right? It's just something that happened, okay? And maybe because his hair got burned off, he, is able to survive better or maybe survive worse, but that would be an acclimation, all right? We also talk about silly things like, the example down below, like, a frog learns that the best place to catch insects is on the far side of the pond. So he goes over there every time he needs to hunt, okay? So that would be an example of something he learns over his lifetime. Knowing how to hunt, just hunting in general, that'd be like instinct because he knows how to do it. But he's not born knowing where to hunt, okay? All right, and then number four, idea proposed by Darwin that says organisms that are better adapted to their environment survive and reproduce, passing on their traits. That is natural selection, okay? And remember, natural selection describes how evolution happens because scientists back in the day knew that change happened over time, but they didn't know how it happened. All right, so Darwin said this is how it happens. It's because organisms that are better adapted to their environment survive and reproduce. All right, moving on to the next section here. Number 5, a structure that is now useless or close to useless. That would be G, vestigial organs. Some examples you've probably talked about. The pelvis or the hip bones in whales. Whales do not have legs, so why do they have hip bones? They don't do anything. Well, the idea is that a long, long time ago, they came from a mammal, Ancestor, that had legs. And over time, those legs got shorter and shorter, and then eventually they disappeared, but they still have that pelvis. We have our appendix attached to our intestines. That doesn't do a whole lot. All right. We also have a tailbone. That doesn't do anything. We don't have a tail. So the reason we have a tailbone and an appendix is because a common ancestor had one. All right, number 6, a structure that comes from a common ancestor. That'd be homologous structure. All right, so you might have talked a little bit about structure or function with this. So these don't have to perform the same job, but they just have to look really similar on the inside. And the common example that I tell my kids is anytime you talk about bones and patterns of bones, it's going to be homologous structure. So we talk about the wings of bats and the arms of birds. They all have that pattern. You guys watch the video where they talk about that one bone, two bones, little bones, many bones pattern. Those are homologous structures, okay? All right, number 7, diagram showing the relationships and traits. That's a cladogram. We'll do more of those on the back page. And then 2 structures that perform a similar function but do not come from a common ancestor. Those are analogous structures, okay? So analogous, they do not come from a common ancestor. The reason that they look similar is because those organisms live in a similar environment as each other, so they both evolved something similar to deal with their environment. So the example I always give is sharks and dolphins. Both of them look very similar. They've got that skinny body, they've got the fins, the tail. They're not related to each other, okay? They didn't get that skinny body and those tails and flippers from the same ancestor, because a shark is a fish and a whale or a dolphin is a mammal, okay? So the reason that they got those structures is because they both needed them in their environment, so they developed them over time, okay? All right, number 9, when an entire species dies out, this should be easy. M, extinction. All right, 10, evolution at the species level, when new species appear or disappear. This is macroevolution, letter I. We talk about macro meaning big. All right, you guys talked a little bit about microevolution too. Micro means small, that's on the gene level. All right, 11, when one species rapidly changes into many different species. This is a type of divergent evolution. It's called adaptive radiation. That's what you guys made those posters on, where you had to create the organism and you had to explain why it had the 4 different traits. So this is adaptive radiation. Remember, Darwin's finches underwent adaptive radiation too, because they all had different beaks that were specialized to eat different types of food. All right, number 12, when 2 species from a common ancestor become more and more different over time. All right, this is divergent evolution, letter L. Okay, so think of 2 roads diverging. If 2 roads diverge, they go apart from each other. Okay, they kind of create a letter V. Usually I do a hand motion. I'm actually doing it right now, which is funny. But diverge means to go away from. So they're going away from each other. They come from a common ancestor, but they look different over time because they live in different environments. All right. 13, when 2 species that are not closely related start to look similar over time because they're adapting to similar environments. This is letter K, convergent evolution. In convergent evolution, we have 2 organisms that are becoming more and more similar. If roads are converging, they're coming together, okay? All right, number 14, 2 species influence each other's evolution. This is letter J, coevolution. All right, so a good example of this is like bees and flowers. A lot of flowers have really specialized structures so that the bees can pollinate them better. And the bees sometimes, or the birds or the insects, have specialized mouth parts so they can get in the flowers really easily. All right, so moving on here, homologous and analogous. Remember, homologous come from a common ancestor, analogous do not. So 15 here, it tells you that the wings of bats, the flippers of whales, arms of humans all come from a common ancestor. So this is going to be homologous. All right. Insects and bats didn't come from a common ancestor, but they both developed wings. This would be an example of analogous. Okay. All right, 17, adaptation or acclimation. A wolf's leg gets caught in a trap and he ends up losing his leg. He learns to walk on only 3 legs. So this is not something that affects his genes. It's something that happens in his lifetime. So this is going to be acclimation. Okay. And then a bear is born knowing it needs to hibernate in winter. This is going to be adaptation because he's born knowing it. It's instinct. All right, last section here. Fish in Malawi rapidly change into many new species. Okay, anytime you see one species changing into many, that's adaptive radiation. Think about the sun radiating. When you draw a sun, you draw all those little lines coming off of it. Well, when you drew the adaptive radiation poster, you drew one species in the middle and 4 lines coming off of it. Okay, and those 4 lines represented those 4 different species. All right, 20, tan mice and white mice. Over time, tan become more prevalent. This is natural selection. All right, and then number 21 here is going to be coevolution. Why is it coevolution? Because the crabs, all right, are adapting to the snails, and the snails are adapting to the crabs. So they're influencing how each other end up developing and evolving. All right, 4 requirements for natural selection. These should be in your notes. I'm actually going to skip this one because you guys have different requirements than I taught my students. So the ones that I taught my students were overproduction, variation, struggle to survive, and reproduction. But you guys have a little bit different ones, which is totally fine. So I'm just going to have you look on your notes. This question is not going to be on the test, so don't worry about it. All right, definition of natural selection. Okay, if you don't already have that, it is the idea that organisms that are best adapted to their environment survive and reproduce. Okay, if you don't, I'm not going to wait for you guys to write that down. You can just go back up to the definition up top here. Okay, all right, cladogram. Which species is most closely related to humans? This would be the kangaroo. How do I know this? Because the kangaroo is the closest to the human on the cladogram. Which one is least related to kangaroos? Well, we got to find the one that's the furthest away, so that would be the shark. The shark is the furthest from the kangaroo. And then what traits do bullfrogs and humans have in common? A lot of my kids got this one wrong, even my honors kids. Okay, so what traits do they have in common? Well, they would have 2 pairs of limbs and vertebrae, okay? It's not mammary glands, it's not placenta, it's not the ones in between the human and the bullfrog, all right? Because if we look at the ones in between, those aren't the ones that the bullfrog has. The bullfrog only has the ones down here, okay? So again, 2 limbs and vertebrae. All right, what's evolution? Evolution is change over time. What are the pieces of evidence we have for evolution? And make sure you guys know how they are pieces of evidence, okay? Like, why do they provide evidence? So I'm going to list off some. You might have more, you might have less than this. Anatomy, so like embryos, all right, and homologous structures. We talk about how embryos look really, really similar over time, in the beginning, right? Many different species have embryos that look really similar. Biogeography, the idea that similar organisms are found in different places around the world. We've got fossils. We've got DNA. I'm sure there's more that I'm missing, but those are the ones I can come up with right now. And then the last one, in an ecosystem, some giraffes have long necks and others have short ones. During a drought, all of the low-lying shrubs died out, so only the giraffes with long necks were able to reach the trees. So what happened over time? You would say that the ones with short necks ended up dying out because they couldn't reach the tree branches. The ones with long necks ended up surviving because they were best adapted to their environment. So over time in that population, we would see the necks, on average, would be longer because the ones with the long necks would survive and the ones with the short necks would die out. All right, make sure you study this. If you have any questions, let the sub know, or you can come ask me, Ms. Frankson, in 104. And the test will be tomorrow. So have a fabulous rest of your day. Good job today.